Welcome to Vancouver. If you don't know it, here is a beautiful view of Vancouver that hopefully everybody can see. So successfully introducing transit priority into mature urban environments. We have recently launched a whole load of transit priority to support a new rapid bus line in Vancouver, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about that and how it has come to pass. So yeah, this is the route I'm going to take you on through the presentation today, and that's also going to be the only bus-related jokes that I give you today, so you'll be pleased to know about that. But anyway, we'll just go through a few of the supported policies and some of the current trends in terms of sort of mode splits and things like that, and introduce you to the route, and then kind of show you how that we helped build the case for transit priority as staff, and then take you through the proposals. And then also let you know kind of how engagement is such a vital factor was kind of weaved into all of this as well. So by way of an introduction, I'm aware that not everyone is going to be aware of exactly where Vancouver kind of fits into our region. So just as a reminder, Vancouver is one city in our kind of Metro Vancouver region that has over 20 municipalities as part of it, but that is kind of where it fits in. And also to remind people that it is a mature urban environment as well, and it was built out almost entirely in the era of the car, and you can kind of see that from this aerial as well. Even outside of the downtown core, it is pretty urban. It's a lot single family, although there's obviously pockets where there's a lot more density. And that orange bar there, just highlighting what we're going to be focusing on today. That is our 41st Avenue Street, where the new bus route is going along. So it really does cut through the geographical center of the city. And just to kind of re-emphasize that, and to kind of try and take you on a little bit of a tour of 41st Avenue, just at the very beginning of this webinar, if you don't know it. So the picture on the left is Joy Street. So we're going from east to west down the corridor here. So this is near a SkyTrain station. In fact, you can kind of see it at the very end of that street there. And there's more density around the SkyTrain station. It's around one of our TOD areas. And then moving on to the right, this is kind of maybe a typical view down much of the corridor. It is flanked by single family homes through much of it. There is a section of the corridor in the middle around the Oak Ridge area that does have more density, and a lot more density is planned. So looks kind of a little bit more urban in that environment there. There's a lot of kind of 6-story buildings. And on the left, where you currently can't see anything, there is a mall hidden there behind the trees, and that is due to significantly densify in the future as well. And then on the right-hand side, that is kind of Kerrisdale High Street, that 41st Avenue kind of takes on that form through a section a little bit further west again. And again, that's a little bit more of a different environment. Everything feels a little bit more compact, but that's a walkable neighborhood as well. And there'll be a lot of sort of pedestrian activity in that area. So just to re-emphasize a little bit of what Oliver was saying, this is definitely a partnership project. As I'm speaking to you today, it's definitely a partnership between TransLink and the City of Vancouver, working together to introduce this new kind of faster bus line. And you'll also hear me, I may kind of say the word B-line, or I might also say RapidBus. This project started out as a new B-line. B-line is the brand that TransLink had for their kind of more kind of express service, limited stop service transit lines, bus transit lines across the city. However, kind of through the process, TransLink launched a rebrand and announced that these new lines were going to be rebranded as RapidBus. So forgive me if I use the terms kind of interchangeably. I guess as a project team, we've had to try and make the transition from B-line to RapidBus. So I'll try and say RapidBus, but if I say B-line accidentally, that's what I mean. So this obviously includes a lot of partnership working, technical analysis, a lot of stakeholder engagement, construction obviously as well. This is kind of the flow of how it went. You know, engagement and sort of design and analysis is kind of has been happening kind of all the way through this process at different stages. But this graphic here just trying to emphasize some of the kind of the main changes that took place in terms of different stages of engagement and the technical analysis, starting really spring 2018, but even some initial thoughts were even happening before that as well. And on the subject of initial thoughts, I thought it was just important to, as we start to, very initially build the case for transit priority on this route, supportive policies are really important in that, and actually talk about a rapid transit line, or a bus rapid transit line or an express route on 41st Avenue is something that has been talked about way before any of this, and it's been talked about as part of our 1997 transportation plan. You can see there with the delightful foot and leg on that picture. But even going back to some of TransLink's earlier regional transportation strategies in 1993 and 2013, it was also talked about in there as well. And a lot of other supporting policies, like major supporting policy documents as well, both from TransLink and the City of Vancouver. And I would just say, like, the most recent one of those would be the climate emergency response, which our city declared at the beginning of this year. And again, we highlighted that as staff in our initial response to council to say, this is one of the initial things that we're doing that contributes towards responding to the climate emergency. But one that I would point out maybe a little bit more is Transportation 2040, which you can see the front page of at the bottom right of the screen. And that is our kind of guiding document at the moment for transportation at the city. And one of the key targets that we have in Transportation 2040 is our mode split target. Transportation 2040 came out in 2012, and it's basically committing us to go from what was 40% in 2008 to 2/3 of all trips made in more sustainable modes, so by walking, biking, or by taking transit by 2040, with this interim target in 2020. It's actually really very ambitious. An 8% growth in the transit mode share actually represents a doubling of our current ridership, and that's based on population projections. So you can see the bar has got bigger, which represents more trips. So it's actually pretty ambitious. And we already thought it was ambitious, and then it became even more ambitious. That was Transportation 2040, but as part of our climate emergency response, we've actually said we're going to try and achieve that 2/3 mode split target by 2030, which is pretty much only 10 years away. So very ambitious. And so we need to do this project and lots more projects to help us get towards that. So are we heading in the right direction? I just want to, just a few current trends to show where the city's going before we dive into 41st Avenue specifically. Just looking at census data very quickly, obviously population and employment have both gone up in the City of Vancouver in the last decade. And then the metro region as a whole has also gone up a lot as well. So our metro region as a total now is about 2.5 million people. We do an annual panel survey so that we can see if we're trending in the right direction. So this is for all sustainable modes. We started in 2013. The latest data is obviously the 2018 panel survey data. And we are trending in the right direction. We are over 50% mode split for sustainable modes. So in some ways, we can say that we're ahead of our 2020 target. And then going back to census data again, more people are commuting by transit, which is great. And there's more people commuting by all of our sustainable modes as well. And actually looking at some of TransLink's specific data, not shown on this bar chart specifically, but transit ridership actually grew 18% in the last 3 years from 2015 to 2018. So that represents record growth and ridership across the region, which sounds great. And we are, as I said, we are trending in the right direction, but we're probably not moving fast enough to hit our targets at the moment. So there's a lot more that we need to do, even though we are kind of heading in the right direction. And one of the other challenges that comes along with this growth is that demand continues to rise quicker than the region can actually provide it. In 2018, there were over 50 routes with consistent overcrowding, and that was up from 38 routes in 2017. As well as overcrowding, bus speeds have also fallen, and bus bunching has increased, which is often used as a proxy for sort of unreliability as well. So we know that we need to do more. So now time to kind of introduce the beeline more specifically now that we've kind of set that context, and realizing that that context is important when you're speaking to decision makers about trying to make these investments. So this is the orange line there, R4 RapidBus. That's the number that it's going to be, R4. And as I said previously, it's going to start at Joyce Collingwood in the east, and it's going to travel through Oak Ridge, through Kerrisdale, and connect to UBC, which is our kind of major university out on the west side. So it's connecting kind of some of the key nodes across the city. To note here that there's other rapid bus lines, as I mentioned, that are going to also launch at the same time as this one, and they're not necessarily all shown on this, but what we are showing here is the SkyTrain network and showing how this rapid bus line is connecting our SkyTrain network, which I guess is kind of the backbone of the system, and then the rapid bus and the other bus networks within the city are really doing moving a whole bunch of people as well, more than they're actually on the SkyTrain. So the other key thing to say, I think, as we set this up, is to say that this is already a very busy corridor. There's two routes that currently run along the length of 41st Avenue. There's the 41 and the 43. The 41 is the local stop service, and the 43 is the limited stop service. Together, they're the second busiest transit corridor in the region. It's over 35,000 boardings a day, 11 million trips annually. And also, very significantly also for this corridor is that, at peak times and in a lot of places along the route, there's over 50% of people are already traveling by transit. And that's just looking at a simple kind of vehicle transit split. So it's already moving more than half the people by transit at some times along this corridor. So what is the proposed route? So it's basically replicating the 43, and although you kind of don't worry about all the detail on this slide, I think the key things to recognize is that when sort of TransLink launched their plan for what the service would look like before we looked at transit priority, because we did kind of look at the high level details of what the service was going to look like initially before we got into the details of what the transit priority would look like. But yeah, so 17 stops on the rapid bus route, including the stops that are in UBC, which is a separate jurisdiction to Vancouver. So the local service has 58 stops. So obviously 17 is far fewer, and limited stop means we can move people faster. It's the big message on that one. It's a 19-kilometer route, I should point out as well. So it's going quite a long way. The service is very frequent. It's all day. It's from 6 a.m. until 1 a.m. is what it will run at. And it's going to run every 3 to 6 minutes during the peak period as well. And it kind of broadly represents a 30% increase in capacity as to the service that's currently there. The buses are going to be diesel electric hybrids as well, so they're a little bit cleaner than what is currently running on the route, although obviously not fully electric. The other thing I should add, that we'll get into a little bit more later, is that there is distinct branding around the rapid buses, and there is also real-time information at the stops as well, which is proposed. The other thing just to mention is there's other supportive work which has been going on to make this project a success. At the eastern end of the route, at the Joyce Collingwood SkyTrain station, there's been a whole bunch of work going on recently to get the station ready for a lot of these buses. So you can see at the bottom, there's a plan. So there's a new bus loop that's been created under the SkyTrain station, and the SkyTrain has also been updated as well. And you can see some of the public art there as well, which has been put in place just to try and make it a really attractive place. And I think it looks fantastic personally. So the following slides, these are examples of what we brought to our decision makers in order to give them the confidence to make the call on this and make a bold call in terms of the amount of transit priority that we wanted to put in place. So the first thing is that transit demand is sustained through the day and through the week. So this isn't just a peak hour issue. And we wanted to show that people are using this route currently all the way through the day, whether it's on the 43 or route 41, the demand is all the way there. And it's also there at the weekends as well. Yes, it's not as high as it would be Monday to Friday, but there is actually substantial ridership on the weekends. And I think that's something that some people are concerned about, given that the end of the route is in UBC, which is a university. People thought, it's very much about getting students to their campus in the morning, which it is playing a huge role in doing that. But those trips are taking place all through the day, and they're also taking place at weekends. And they're also taking place, and which is not shown on these graphs, all throughout the year as well. I think the other concern is that the ridership would drops off. This is what the public's perception was, that the ridership would drop off through the summer months when UBC is not in session. But the data doesn't. The data does show a drop, but it's not as dramatic as you would think. There's still high ridership all the way through the summer as well. Another piece of data that we helps kind of put this puzzle together in terms of building this case is that, as I mentioned before, transit riders are a high proportion of those people that are using the street. So in the morning, there is more of a flow to the west to UBC, and the transit mode share is generally always above 20%, and in some places on the corridor, it does get as high as 70% of people traveling on the corridor, either by bus or by car. And then in the eastbound, again, it's not quite as high, but it is also still very high and gets over 50% in many of the locations. And then at the bottom of this slide, then just pointing out that even in the middle of the day, sort of outside of the typical peak periods, it's still like generally very healthy, kind of over 20% as well. So these buses are moving a lot of people. They're moving a lot of people, but they are kind of struggling to do it a little bit, or a lot. I think is what these next few slides are going to speak to. So bus bunching is representative of kind of the unreliability for transit. And although I remember when I first read these stats, bus bunching is occurring on 5% of Route 41 and 3% of Route 43 trips, it doesn't sound that bad, but actually, a lot of that is occurring at peak times, and actually it is really significant. And I think these graphs kind of show that out as well, that, as you get towards the end of the route, if you're heading eastbound, it gets worse and worse and worse, and those buses are more likely to be bunched together. And unreliability means you basically, as a person that's using that service, you have to allow more time for your trip because you don't know if it's going to take 10 minutes or 20 minutes. So you have to allow the fact that it's going to take 20 minutes. And that's really annoying. In the westbound direction, buses can get delayed straight away at the beginning. It is very constrained at that east end of the route. And so bus bunching is occurring. It's actually worse westbound than it is eastbound. Another key piece of data, and TransLink was really good with the data that they are able to collect and share with us, that really helps, made a strong technical case for this, using the data that is collected by the buses, able to put some really good pictures together of transit travel times and how they do very significantly during the day. This is just an example of some of the data that we use to help make the case. This is split down into different sections on the route. So I'm just showing one particular section, Dunbar to West Boulevard, and this is for the weekday. And it does show, relative to those times of the day, like, super early in the morning. I don't know if you can kind of read all of that, but it's basically the eastbound one is starting at like 5:15 in the morning and goes all the way through to midnight. And it's, showing like when there is very little traffic on the road, it's taking sort of about 300 seconds to make that trip. And as you get into the middle of the day, it's about sort of 2.5 minutes slower. And then sort of at peak times, it can be about 6.5 minutes slower than that. And then in westbound, there's a different pattern, but again, it's kind of, you're losing 2 minutes. And that's just over this particular section between Dunbar and West Boulevard. That is not the whole route. And that's just one section. And then, but this pattern is kind of played out all along the route. But I think when you're thinking about different transit priority measures that you might want to consider at different parts of the route, it's great to be able to see like where is most of the delay occurring, rather than just looking at the route as a whole. It's great to be able to see it in these kind of in these different chunks of the route all the way along. And so that was the weekday. And just to show, again, at the weekend, we don't want to ignore the weekend. There's delay occurring at the weekend as well. Like it's a different delay pattern, and it's obviously corresponds to traffic volumes as well. That at the weekend, we all know that kind of the peak is much more spread out kind of all the way through the middle of the day, and that's reflected here. Just one thing I just want to point out here, in case it's not clear, is the data that was collected. So the black line is showing the average travel time at any one period during the day. And then the green and the blue and the yellow and the red is just showing kind of the range of travel times as well. So this does also speak to reliability as well. There's quite a range in there as well that you can see. It's even worse on the weekday one. And to speak to that reliability, these are another example of some great graphics, which again, TransLink was able to share with the city, and as staff working together, TransLink and the city and consultants, was another thing that helped us build up a really great picture of unreliability as well. So, for example, looking at the graphic on the left, and again, this is just a particular section of 41st Avenue between East Boulevard and Main Street in this instance, but it's just showing in this instance in the eastbound direction, in the PM peak, the travel time in general is slower because it's further towards the right-hand side of the graph, but it's also quite spread out, which shows like a variability in terms of the travel time as well. Whereas if you look at the kind of the pinky one for the evening, you can see firstly it's much faster, and also there's less variability. It's more peaky, it's less spread out. And then looking on the westbound side again, I've labeled the AM peak, which has got this huge variability in travel time related to, for example, the evening, which is just more situated over on the left-hand side of that westbound graph, showing that more of those trips are hitting a more consistent travel time as well. I guess you may already be thinking kind of, as we do transit priority, and that often means bus lanes, kind of where other bus lanes are going to be coming from. And I think we knew from the beginning that as 41st Avenue does have parking on it, street parking along much of its length, definitely the kind of the lower hanging fruit was parking. So in order to set ourselves up for success, we definitely needed to know, like, as we considered that, like, what were those impacts going to be? So this, again, is just another example of some of the data that we collected, but we also needed to be able to show that generally street parking is available on adjacent streets, and that if some of that parking did need to shift from 41st Avenue onto those adjacent parallel streets or kind of streets that intersect with 41st Avenue, that there would be space for those vehicles to relocate. And generally, I mean, I'm basically showing the most busy portion here, which is around Joyce, where at Joyce Station, but generally along the route, we found that there was plenty of capacity. We can't ignore traffic, vehicular traffic through all of this, obviously, and that is definitely something that we needed to show, and we definitely need to be mindful of this as well, and that we couldn't ignore that. We needed to make sure that traffic could still flow reasonably along the route. The black dots that I added to this graph are just showing, like, typically what we would see able to be accommodated in a single lane in an urban environment. I know it's a little bit lower than maybe 800 or so that you might have heard, like maybe on a more suburban arterial, but I think we feel that on a mature kind of urban street like 41st Avenue, where there are a lot of intersections and there are still kind of parallel parking maneuvers taking place, the capacity kind of tends to be a little bit lower than this. So this is just showing for some of the key arterial intersections on 41st along there, just showing what those traffic volumes are and showing that we need to be mindful of that along the length of the corridor. And then the graph on the right is zooming in on a particular area of the corridor, but showing and looking at some sort of minor street volumes or what the volume is on 41st at some minor street intersections, but looking at it all the way through the day as well. And again, needing to kind of collect this information and put it together so that we could try and build a picture up of like how many hours of the day should these bus lanes be in effect for. And it's not, although we do care about vehicles, I think you also have to remember that if we don't have bus lanes and the buses are in with general traffic, 600 is also the volume. It's not saying if we're over 600 that the traffic grinds to a halt, it doesn't, but it definitely starts to become a lot less reliable and more subject to delays. And if we don't have a bus lane, it does mean that the buses are in with that traffic as well. So we're impacting transit riders as well. This isn't just about impacting people driving vehicles as well. I'm just noting down there in the bullets as well. Weekend peak hour volumes, we looked at that as well, and they were actually fairly close to the weekday peaks as well, kind of usually within about 90% of them. So there's a lot of data, and as I said, like, you know, the focus here is to say, like, this is the type of data that we were showing to our decision makers. So coming up with a way to clearly show all of that was really important. And so this is the kind of graphic that we developed to show existing conditions on the route. And again, I've just been through a lot of this data, so I'm not going to go through this slide in detail, but this is something that we showed to our council to kind of give them, enable to give them a kind of graphical overview of what we were doing. And it shows obviously kind of number of vehicle lanes and parking lanes and availability of those parking lanes to be converted into bus lanes or other travel lanes if necessary, like depending on the width of them. Very generalizing vehicle volumes in the peak direction and how high they were and kind of at certain thresholds. So again, looking at where buses were most slow on certain parts of the route. And then where parking demand could less easily be accommodated on side streets as well. So once we put all of that information together, what were the proposals that we developed? And again, like in a similar theme here, we developed a graphic, and this is a simplified version actually of that graphic to clearly show like what we were proposing. And again, this is something that we could communicate to decision makers as well. So over 13 kilometers of bus lanes are proposed for the route. Many of those running from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., 7 days per week. This is definitely being bold. Existing bus lanes that we have in the city generally run peak hours, peak directions, 5 days a week. So this is a big step up for us, and this is a bold step for us to go 7 to 7, 7 days a week. It's our new 777 standard, if you want a catchy phrase for it. So this does involve removal of parking through large parts of the day along much of the corridor. The parking impacts are mainly in residential areas. Some locations, you can see that, so the blue areas on this graphic are areas where we have put bus lanes into effect. And you'll see on the western portion of the corridor, it's largely just on the south side, representing an eastbound bus lane. So through that part of the corridor, the curb-to-curb width was slightly narrower. So those parking lanes are too narrow to be converted into bus lanes. So you essentially lose both the parking lanes in order to achieve just one bus lane. So we picked the eastbound as the current delay was anticipated, was kind of calculated to be slightly higher, and so there was more benefit. The Oak Ridge area there, labeled number 6, as I said, this is a simplified version. I kind of cut off all the notes associated with it, but that's an area that it intersects with the Canada line, one of our rapid transit lines. There's a lot of development proposed in that area and a lot of development that is currently under construction. So unfortunately, 41st Avenue is kind of, subject to kind of construction-related delays at the moment through that section. So again, like the vision there is 7 to 7, 7 days a week. But that's not being achieved on opening day just due to construction. So there's an interim that's being proposed through that. The other light blue area is labeled as Kerrisdale, which is definitely an older established neighborhood. I showed you a photo of it at the beginning with that high street. And in a lot of places, narrow sidewalks where there's a lot of people walking adjacent to retail stores. So that is an area where we haven't proposed any bus lanes through there, just to be sensitive to the on-street parking. But I will get to that later. There is something else that we proposed in that area, which I'll get to you when I speak about engagement specifically. The other thing to note, between Victoria Drive and Kingsway, it's again a narrow cross-section. It's only 4 lanes wide. And again, there's rush regs through that section at the moment. And we've basically extended those rush regs to be 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., 7 days a week. So basically the rush regs mean that you just can't park adjacent to the curb while the rush regs are in effect. We actually found that the parking demand was very low in this area because we already had rush regs both directions for both the AM and the PM peak. So we were essentially just kind of filling in the middle of the day anyway. There was hardly anyone using that parking. It was kind of, I guess, not that useful to a lot of people as it was only available for a few hours of the day. Yeah, there's also some new left turn, like the detail that's not shown on here is that we also introduced some new left turn lanes and some new signals as part of this as well. So it's important to get the details right. That was kind of the bold vision overall for transit priority, but also important to get the details right in certain locations. This is where 41st, which becomes Joyce Street at that location, intersects with Kingsway. This is the location, you can just see the A on the graphic there on the top left. This is where we do have a queue jump lane. We also reconfigured, this is also a good point to say, like a lot of these proposals were also about reconfiguring the bus stops as well. Hopefully moving the kind of far side, we lengthened the bus zones to provide more storage room so that we could have independent arrivals and departures at some of the stops where space allowed. And yeah, reposition the stops, preferably on the far side as well. There's also need to weigh trade-offs as well. And again, it's other examples of what we were doing, and I kind of mentioned, you know, like in some locations, we could convert parking to bus lanes on both sides of the street on the drawing on the left. And in other locations, that wasn't possible due to the width, and we had to just have one bus lane in one particular direction. So we didn't have budget to move curbs in most places and had to work within the existing curb to curb width, which is why we kind of had to make that trade-off. The other trade-off that we were considering is that you can see on that bottom right-hand side, like the sidewalk is fairly narrow in some places. And at the moment, those pedestrians are buffered by parked vehicles. And so by making this change, that buffering doesn't exist anymore. So that was definitely something that we wanted to carefully weigh off. We didn't want to compromise pedestrian safety as well. So in all of these projects, there's trade-offs. And yeah, without compromising safety, we kind of had to make the right call in some of those areas as well. I said that engagement was important. Engagement, although I'm talking about it now, after the proposals, engagement was really critical to, engagement took place all the way through the project. TransLink did the initial engagement. They launched in spring 2018. It was kind of online, and there were also some pop-up events as well. And the key thing here is about, at this early stage, about 80% of people supported or strongly supported changes to the street to make the B-line faster and more reliable. This is before specific details were known, but it shows that there's very strong support for the principles of better, faster, more reliable bus service. So the city kind of led a sort of second stage of engagement where we went out and met with a whole bunch of different advisory committees and groups. We met with business improvement associations along the route. We did a door-to-door business outreach in many key areas. We also met with schools, including parent advisory committees. We met with staff at community centers. There was a lot. And I would say that we used political and social capital to do that as well. A lot of times, and we can talk about this maybe more in the Q&A, but kind of the level of participation was more about was more in the informed stage. We were kind of, a lot of the times we were kind of telling people what was going to happen, but then sort of, is there any particular things that we can do to kind of make this better for you in certain situations? There was examples of kind of moving passenger loading zones that we were going to remove because we were going to put bus lanes in, but we could maybe relocate those onto a side street. So there was kind of, you know, conversations around that was really positive. But, you know, there were 17,000 notification letters that were sent out to kind of let everybody along the corridor know what was happening. And then we supported those with 7 kind of pop-up events as well, where people could come and sort of seek clarity on some of those things as well. But it did take a lot of effort, and we needed to kind of essentially get in extra staff resources to do that. We were using kind of communication specialists to help with media inquiries and issues management. And there was a full-time public engagement lead as well on that. So we did do 2 open houses, and one of them was in Kerrisdale. And as I said to you, we were sort of sensitive to not wanting to strip all the parking through the high street in Kerrisdale, but we did know that there was kind of particular issues as well in Kerrisdale, where we wanted to unblock a pair of intersections, which did cause east-west delay. And you can see here it's a West Boulevard and East Boulevard. There used to be a railway line running between them, and so it's sort of a historical thing where we landed up with this graphic is showing what we were proposing, but currently if you went there, you'd see 2 signalized intersections in very, very close proximity. Does cause delay, does cause unreliability. So in this particular neighborhood, we did go out and we were proposing to remove one of those signals, essentially. It also, by doing that and making geometric changes, it also enables us to kind of put in left turn lanes where there aren't any and essentially kind of make the east-west movement for all vehicles, but including buses, a lot more efficient. And I think we did hear, the community liked the principle of the changes to speed up the east-west flow, but they were definitely concerned about the circulation and access impacts to restricting turning movements at the East Boulevard intersection. To the north there, where you can't see, there was a sports facility there, and people were concerned about more circuitous access to that facility. So there were mitigation measures identified to this. So this portion of the project, as a result of this, was delayed until next year, and that's going to allow more time for developing options and further public engagement on that option. So in summary, what we heard through the engagement is we did hear strong support, and people understand why that we're doing what we are doing. However, when it comes to specific issues at people's houses, there's a lot of people that have lived there for 20, 30 more years. And when you say that you're going to take away what they consider to be their parking space in front of their home, that's a painful message for a lot of people to hear. So there's definitely concerns expressed around that. And in many, many cases, the vast majority of cases, there is a lane system in Vancouver. So that is not people's only parking. They do have rear lanes with garages off those rear lanes. So it's not like we are taking away their ability to park, but still, it's a painful change that you're asking people to make. Yeah, that third bullet, with the number of properties that we did impact, and we did get complaints, and we've had a lot of discussions with a lot of different residents, but actually, you could say surprisingly few, given that the amount of properties that we did change the parking regulations outside their house. And there was, on a western portion of the corridor, we were more sensitive to some specific driveway issues that some residents had, and we did actually make a change to what we were proposing as a result of that. There was a number of properties with only had driveways directly on the 41st, and so we did work with those property owners and did make a change to the time that the bus lanes are in effect to help accommodate some of their needs in a very specific instance where we felt that the data supported bus lanes for fewer hours of the day, right at the very western end of the route. So the final stages for this then, construction. I was not deeply involved with the construction, but just to say, construction did start in June, involved a sign plan, a paint plan, and we did resurface some sections as well. When you do change the paint, there's obviously concerns about kind of shadowing and people being able to see 2 lines and things, and sort of depending on whether it was, we were doing a lot of paint changes to, say, accommodate a new left turn bay or something like that. There are decisions that were made about where we needed to resurface, and often you can use existing budgets when sections of the street have already been identified that they need resurfacing anyway, and you can maybe move up that work. So basically, the works are essentially complete now. There's a few more overhead signs for the bus lanes that we're waiting for, but essentially everything is in effect now with the existing services. And then the actual brand launches in January 2020. And this is what the new buses are going to look like. There's going to be real-time bus information displays, as I mentioned. They're battery operated. They last about 2 years. This was really good that they didn't require to be like hardwired into power. It meant it was much easier to install them. And it's a custom TransLink design, so thank you very much, TransLink, for that. They look great, and they're going to get installed pretty soon, ready for the January launch. So just to be clear, the infrastructure is now essentially in place along the route. So the existing buses, Route 41 and 43, are already benefiting from all the bus lanes that are in place. But in terms of sort of cutting a ribbon and the actual brand and the increase in service hours that go along with that, that will be coming in January. So just trying to wrap up here, like what did we learn? It's definitely advantageous to have a strong policy context within which to deliver. It definitely helps, this policy context definitely helps if the data isn't a slam dunk in some instances. And you definitely even in public forums as well, if people are questioning the data, showing that you've got that strong policy context is really important. Having said that, like a robust technical case is obviously really important as well. And you need to be able to show this clearly, and you need graphically to be able to show that clearly to senior staff and council in order to make sure you've got strong support for them. Engagement is really critical to success. I've definitely become an engagement advocate through this project. People feel that their voices, people need to feel that their voices have been heard and that we understand their concerns. It doesn't mean we'll always do what they want, but if they don't feel that they've been heard, then they can be as angry at the process as they are about the changes themselves. This also means maintaining effective stakeholder relationships. They can really be cheerleaders for us and advocates for us, but only if we engage them in the right way. Partnerships between agencies are also critical. You've got to work at it. It doesn't necessarily come naturally, because although we share broadly the same goals, sometimes there's conflicting priorities when making specific decisions. So definitely having a clear decision framework and communication lines to ensure smooth progression is really important. And we don't always hear from our biggest fans. We're moving 35,000 people a day. They're not all writing us emails saying thank you for making these changes. But we obviously we have had several hundred people kind of expressing various concerns. So it's important, I think, as staff to kind of remember that we are making kind of a positive change for people. And then as I was putting this together, I was just thinking, you know, as I'm kind of reflecting on this project now, like success can mean many different things, and hopefully we've done a lot of those things, and some of those I think are still to be seen, you know, as the brand launches and as we collect more data. But yeah, it's not just about faster, more reliable buses, but you know, we want more satisfied customers. We do want higher ridership, but we also want to deliver on time and on budget. And I think those stakeholder relationships with the community are really important as well. And with that, I will close.